Hi, it's Jamie from jamiewhitguitar.com here, and this video is my 5 top tips to help you overcome an issue that every guitarist will face at one point or another, and that's how to change your chords a little bit faster. Okay, the first tip I've got, and to me this is probably the most common mistake that people make, but also the easiest thing to fix. So I think this is probably the most important one to talk about, and that is to give yourself more time to change. All too often I see guitarists who feel that when they make a chord change it has to happen within an absolute microsecond. It's got to be lightning fast, and what you'll tend to have happen is something like this. So there I had a change of a G chord to a C chord and then back to another G. And what I was doing there is I was holding the chord for the entire bar, and then at the very end of the bar, then I was trying to make my chord change really fast, so there was almost no gap between those chords. Now if you listen to any guitarist worth their salt, and certainly if you watch guitarists play, you'll hopefully be able to pick up. But we just don't do that. We want to make a chord change which is fluent and flowing, and usually that means letting go of the chord a little bit sooner to give ourselves time to efficiently make the next chord, rather than that chord change being too rushed. So I would normally let go of the chord that I was going to change away from on the last upstroke of a rhythm pattern, of a strumming pattern. And if I did that, it would sound something like this. So hopefully straight away that sounds much more flowing, much more fluent. You'll notice I'm actually hitting open strings there to cover the change as well, which is always a very strange concept when people are first told about this approach, that you can have open strings as part of the sound, but it ends up sounding really good by having that. It's kind of like the chords taking a breath before you change to the next one, so it really works. Okay, so the second tip, and now we're thinking about actually how we're moving to the next chord and how the fingers are moving and ways that we can make that more efficient, because if it's more efficient, it can always be faster. And the next tip is don't let your first finger lead. Now, for most people, when they first start to make chords and first play the guitar even, you know, your first finger will usually be the most easily controllable, most accurate finger on your hand. And the tendency then is to let that one dictate what all the other ones are doing. So the first finger will move to a chord first, and then the other ones would follow. And that would look something like this. Now, as we're going to talk about in one of the later tips, eventually what you want to aim for is all the fingers moving at one single time. But initially, obviously, that might be a bit of a stretch and not entirely feasible. So you're going to have to let one finger go before the others most of the time when you're first starting out. The problem with when that becomes the first finger is that you're really playing to your strengths and not working on your weaknesses. So you're letting that first finger become even better, and the other fingers are going to lag behind that. And what we want to be doing is to be building up the other fingers so that they feel that they're as strong and easily controllable and as accurate as that first finger. Additionally, with some certain chord changes, changing to the first finger first will put your hand at a disadvantage, and that's quite easy to see with the example we've got here of the G to the C chord, because if I change between those chords and I go first finger first, what I tend to find happens is that this arrangement will go. So your first finger will move across and your second, third and fourth will kind of peel back to give the first finger time to change and room to move. But of course, all of that distance which they've moved back over here, they've then got to cover that to get back to that chord, and that's going to cost you time. A much better alternative for how to approach that would be to move to your third finger first for that C change. Now you see when I do that, the first and second fingers have now still kind of come away a little bit, but actually now they're hovering above precisely where they need to fall. So if I just drop them, they'll go exactly where they need to be for that chord. And all the time, as mentioned a couple of minutes earlier, that third finger, by moving that one first, that one will be developing, that one will be getting much, much stronger and much better, and will be moving towards this ultimate goal of being able to move all of them at the very same time. Okay, the next tip I've got, and this is one which is all about the efficiency of how we change and how we can improve that, and it's let all your fingers go when changing. Now, a very common mistake I find guitarists make when they change chords is that they will kind of look to find the next chord one finger at a time whilst keeping all of the other ones on the previous chord. So with a G to C change, that would look something like this. So I'm kind of moving back and taking one finger off at a time and moving it and piecing that chord together as I go. The problem with this is tension in your hand and the fingers getting in the way of each other. And those are two things which will kill your efficiency, and then they're going to make your chord change much, much slower. A way easier way to make that change and a much more efficient approach to take is between the changes, let all of your fingers go, and then you're going to relax your hand, you're going to loosen up the joints so they can move much easier. Your fingers aren't going to be clattering into each other as they try and find the notes that they need to find. You've got space and room to move for your chord change, and you're going to end up with a much better chord change as a result. Okay, the next tip, this is kind of a big one because I think it's the ultimate way for your chords to change, which is going to make them really efficient and therefore as fast as you need them to be, and it's to make all of your fingers touch down at the very same moment. So as we've talked about in previous tips, one of the ways that most people will approach chord changes initially, which is kind of understandable, is that the fingers will move one at a time. So you'd have something like something like that, but hopefully you would make it so that it's not that first finger leading for one thing. Then we would think about this next tip, which is to try to make all of the fingers move at the very same moment, because that's obviously going to be faster if they're all moving at the same time than if they have to move in a one at a time staggered fashion. So that would look something like this. Now, the way to practice and work on that is a very difficult thing, so it's going to take some time, is to do what I call the reset technique. And what you would do is you would take any chord, if you can do this with all of the chords that you use and all of the chords that you play, especially the ones that you don't feel quite so strong on, then what you would do is you would make that chord first of all, give it a play to check it's ringing out nice and clear. And then what you would do is you would, after a while, you'd hold that chord down for a few moments, and then you just let the chord go, let the pressure out of your hand, and just let them hover ever so slightly off of the fretboard, and then let them all return, but you're looking for them to touch down on the strings at precisely the same moment if possible. And then you do that again, and over and over and over again, for as long as you can stand it, pretty much, but a couple of minutes would be fantastic. And then as you get better at that, you'll find you can let your fingers come a little further away. You can still hold that shape and still let them go down and touch at the very same moment. And what you're really looking for is eventually for your whole hand to start moving away, but to still feel you can touch down at the very same moment. And when you can do that, it will be something you can start to incorporate into your changes. And then if you add that up with everything else we've talked about, giving yourself time, giving yourself lots of space away from the fretboard by letting all of the fingers go at the same time, and then you can move them all down at the same time, you're going to end up with an extremely efficient change. And if it's very efficient, then it's going to be very fast. Okay, the final tip, and this one's actually addressing a very common piece of advice that I hear and see a lot with regards to chord changes, which I actually don't think is that helpful, and that's pivot fingers. What pivot fingers are, or the idea of it with regards to chord changes, is that if you had two chords back to back which had a common finger, a common note between those two chords, you would leave that finger attached to the fretboard and you would pivot everything else around that point. A good example of this is the G chord to the D chord. So if I played the full 4-finger version of G and then change to a D chord, that third finger would stay on and I would pivot around, hop the first and second fingers across and make the change that way. Now, the reason I don't think that's fantastically helpful, at least not initially, is that what you would end up doing by playing that type of change between those chords is you would get really, really good at playing a G chord to a D chord, but you're not practicing making a D chord completely from scratch, which is what you would have to do if you had any other chord before it which didn't share common notes, like an E, like an E minor, like an A, like a C, like lots of other really common combinations of chords. And what I think is much, much better is to always, at the initial stages, is always to treat each chord change as a fresh slate, so that you build up a technique which it does not matter the context of the chord, which chord came first, which chord came after. You'll kind of be ready for everything and anything. Now, once your hand control and your ability goes up and you start to feel really confident and comfortable with your chord changes, then by all means using pivot fingers is really actually quite an efficient way to change. So that can ultimately become part of what you do. But in the initial stages, I would say to avoid it and always practice your chord changes, doing everything that we've talked about with the all-off approach, ideally all of them moving at the same time, and then you can build a technique which is ready for anything. Okay, I hope those have helped. If you've got any questions at all, then please do get in touch or pop them in the comment section below. And please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more similar videos like this one. Thank you.